We all know the importance of having a good woofer in your home theater system, and I'm not talking about doggos, although I do love them. We're talking about subwoofers, of course, and that brings me to the SVS SB17-Ultra R. It's a mouthful, but it's the pinnacle of what SVS has come to offer in today's market, and it kind of represents the best you can get from their product lineup. Being the pinnacle of performance, obviously you can expect pinnacle pricing, and this has a US MSRP at the time of filming this of $2,500. There are two variants of this subwoofer, and I will be making some comparisons and kind of explanations along the way. So both of them, regardless of the sealed or ported configuration, are rated for 2,800 watts RMS and over 6,000 watts peak. Even on the sealed version, which isn't typically known for extending as deeply as ported subs, it's rated down to 15 Hertz with a plus or minus 3 decibel swing, which is close to flat below 20 Hertz. That's amazing, and that's to be expected given this price range. The other important stat to keep in mind is these weigh about 125 pounds each unboxed, so keep that in mind if you're planning on moving it around a bit, depending on the quality of your back or where you're trying to lift it. Plan accordingly. Now, before I get any further, SVS did send these out to me for review. Part of it was per my request. I reached out and solicited getting these because, to be frank, I've purchased countless SVS subwoofers in my house. I have sealed SVS subs in my studio here that I'm filming in, and my living room had a mix of PB 2000s and 1000 subs because, frankly, it's a larger room and I needed to fill it. So I've kind of been in the market, and then the Ultra 17s got announced, and I wanted to spend some serious time with them, both from a setup, listening a wide variety of movies and music and all of that. So it was sent to me for review. It won't affect what I say. I don't do any marketing kickbacks, and I could say with like 99% certainty I'll be purchasing these after the review. Again, it's not like given to me for free either, so full disclosure there. So going back to the subs, now usually sealed subs are known for their tighter, punchier bass, and ported subs are known for their deeper bass extension. Because you have ports, you can tune the enclosure to accentuate or embellish certain frequencies. It basically makes it more efficient at delivering various frequencies depending on port tuning, the cabinet design, etc. So a lot of times in the past, at least on lower price models especially, you kind of have to pick one flavor or the other. You know, if you're only spending a few $100s, which is what people's budget is, and you're doing home theater, that's typically why you see ported subs, because you're usually using subwoofers to kind of take most bass notes under 80 Hertz. You know, a typical LFE implementation is, you know, bass going into the subsonic range up until about 80 Hertz. Some people cross them over higher if you have, you know, full range speakers that don't go below 100 Hertz, for example. So the deep bass is important, and that's why ported subs are typically found in the more affordable lineup because it's more efficient. Conversely, sealed enclosures have had the reputation of being a little bit better for music just because they are tighter and punchier. You know, when you think of a sealed box, if that subwoofer is trying to drive itself in very low frequencies, which usually result in very high excursion, the vacuum that is created, or the sealed enclosure, is basically pulling on that driver and keeping the voice coil from overextending itself. So you get a nice punch and faster transition of the woofer returning back to center because of that. And you can technically get a higher power handling from a higher frequency perspective, like for that instant punch. But because it's less efficient at lower frequencies, your power handling may actually seem worse because, you know, regardless of how efficient the box is, if you're chasing as many SPLs or decibels as you can at 20 Hertz, well, a ported enclosure is going to be more efficient at delivering that. But having said all of that, the reason why this particular subwoofer is special is because the idea is to cross over both. You know, SVS has been working really hard to kind of break the connotation that ported can't be used for music and that sealed can't be used for movies. I tend to work on a simple principle in this case where if you're 95% focused on movie content and occasional music, then I think ported is going to give you a little bit bang for your buck, at least a more improved return on your investment, whereas sealed is better if you have a mix closer to 50-50 for music as well. Now, even with all that being considered, there's another thing to factor in, and that is the cabinet volume, because sealed subwoofers are typically a lot more compact, even using the same driver, because they don't have to account for the special tuning characteristics inside the enclosure, the physical ports, etc. And that is why I chose the SB17-Ultra R, because it's sealed. It's about 5 inches shorter and about 8 inches less deep than the ported counterpart. And for the setup I did in my living room, that was the only way I could make a subwoofer this powerful work. Now, I recently had a custom entertainment system built in the living room for a few reasons. One, it looks nicer. Two, I wanted to keep the wife happy. And I also wanted to be able to hide all my components and not see all the cables. It's really nice to just kind of focus on the TV and hear the sound instead of seeing a bunch of of stuff everywhere. Also easier to keep your stuff clean. So the cabinets that were built, it's using real maple, and then I have GIK Acoustics sourced acoustic fabric on the front cabinets for where the subwoofers go. It was built with heavy subwoofers in mind, so I kind of factor that into the design, and the SVS SB17-Ultra Rs fit in there perfectly, even with the grills on and the cables protruding out of the back. So I'm really happy with this setup. They kind of blend in. It does change the properties of the sound performance just slightly because of putting a box around a box. It's not perfectly neutral, but I knew that going in, and we'll get into sound tuning and calibration later to make the most out of it. But overall, I'm really happy with the result. Now, I'll admit I was a little bit nervous on setting these up for the first time because the power increase was so great compared to my existing subwoofer setup. And I even put some blue tack underneath some of the picture frames and objects resting on my shelves to kind of ensure they wouldn't vibrate off. So that was solid there. I started at a lower gain, and then I just kind of slowly increased it until it got closer to my personal preference. Now, being passionate about audio and loving high-end speakers, I love and truly appreciate good sounding speakers. To me, that's where a lot of the magic happens, but there is no denying that a good subwoofer can make or break an entire system, especially in home theater. So I do a lot of demos and kind of listening sessions at my home, both in the studio and the living room. And I can tell you, I've rotated a lot of very expensive audio gear through this house, and nothing has brought more smiles to people's faces than having dual SB17s. The wow factor is like seriously 10x over anything I've done in the past. And I think that says a lot about the impact of having good subwoofers in your system. It can transform things, and it doesn't matter if you're watching or listening to Dune, Top Gun, Tron, even if you're watching a kid's movie like Sonic, which I'll admit I love the movie personally for myself, so it's a good excuse to watch a wide variety of movies. And what makes a good subwoofer implementation special is it's not just that crazy impactful bass for the scene you want it to be, like something on Dune or an explosion, but all of the stuff in between, all of the connecting scenes that aren't as big and robust. If you have a proper subwoofer system implemented and paired up well with your speakers, it can still make those scenes immensely more enjoyable as well. Now, I am pleased to say that the SB17 is obviously performing really well on the scenes I do get really excited on demoing. You know, when I was watching Dune, when I was watching Blade Runner, and showcasing even the Phantom Menace, the original, or like episode 1, not original. I know Star Wars fans would go crazy if I said that. But episode 1, Phantom Menace, the scene where they're all racing with the pod racers, that's an awesome home theater demo too. And when you turn the system up, these subs are digging so damn deep, it never phases them. And that's a huge thing with subwoofers, is you don't want to expose a weakness, whether that's lack of sound, distortion, boominess. You want it to sound cohesive. And the SB17s dug as deep as I needed to. I measured these, and they do go below 20 hertz, no problem. I was within a couple decibels of 20 hertz, going down to 15. So that's pretty impressive for a sealed enclosure. Obviously, when you push it at much higher SPL volumes, you're gonna run into some form of power limit handling at that point, but I can easily get over 100 decibels below 20 hertz. It gets uncomfortable at those levels, so it's just a matter of personal preference, but these things are definitely up to the task. Now, music is where I'm actually more picky with subwoofers because it exposes a lot in terms of their, technical performance and speed typically, and a lot of lower priced ported subs simply don't add enough enjoyment to me for my towers. If you have a good full range loudspeaker, a tower that can go below 40 hertz, a lot of times I haven't necessarily found the need for a sub. So the SB17 surprised me with their speed. That was something I didn't expect, because when you have that kind of power handling with that size of a driver, there's a lot of inertia involved. And typically that means they're not going to be as quick with bass transients. Really important for guitars and drums, in my opinion. And this was surprisingly fast for me. I never felt like it was holding my speakers back. I'm reviewing some Dolly speakers right now, and that review will be coming very soon because I dialed them in to work together. Those speakers are great on their own. I've used the T+A solitaire speakers in my office as well for comparisons, and they're all fast. They don't neither of them get deep enough where I feel like I can get by without a subwoofer. So having a sub that's this powerful is obviously overkill for music applications, but when you dial it in with the right gain and EQ adjustments and all of that, the bass, speed, performance, technicality, all of that is really exceptional. So this really is one of those subwoofers that you can fully use it in both applications for music and movies, and even gaming, of course. So I'm really happy with that. I found that when I was listening to rock music, kick drums really grabbed the room very quick. It was very snappy. And then when I was listening to jazz or EDM or rap, those bass notes are significantly deeper. So naturally, something like an SB17 is really going to come to life on that. And that's where it added the most noticeable impact to my music. Moving past sound quality at a high level, I want to talk about setup and the importance of it. It's not just simply how much money can you spend, put that all in a sub, plug it in, and hope for the best. Speaker placement, room treatment, room calibration, setup, all of these things can have a massive difference on your subwoofer's performance, to an extent where a less expensive sub placed in the right location with proper setup and room treatment can often sound better than a much more expensive subwoofer. So don't go full speed ahead, think you can just brute force a room with a very large sub and not think about any of that stuff. It still goes a long way. Before I get into more of the room specific stuff, I want to talk about two accessories that SVS offers. One of them is the sound path isolation system, which for $50 for a set of 4, and a little bit more for the set of 6, depending on your subwoofer. The $50 system works with the SB17. It comes with 4 rubber feet, if you will, that goes under the sub to help isolate vibration from transferring into the floor or whatever they're setting. That can help if you have neighbors that are sharing a wall. It can help if you have some rattling issues. It won't fully eliminate it, but it's something that can help. And I haven't heard these specifically. I've heard from competitors, much more expensive ones, isoacoustics, for speakers, and I was blown away at the performance impact it made on full range speakers. So I will be getting some of those because I want to experience that. I was shocked at how good the sub sounded anyway, and I didn't really have any rattle issues. But keep that in mind, that is an optional accessory to consider. Another accessory helps with physical placement, and that's the SVS SoundPath wireless transmitter system, which is $120, comes with a couple, transmitter receiver, one connecting to your receiver, and then the other one sits by your sub up to 65 feet away. Now, newer subs like the SB17 has a USB port on the back, which will power the receiver, and it comes with all the cables you need. It's a full standalone system. The idea of that is so you can put the sub in the ideal location without necessarily having to run a very long subwoofer cable. Maybe you physically can't run a cable where you want to put it, or you don't want to deal with seeing a very long cable running across the floor. It does add about 14 milliseconds of latency though, so if you are doing room calibration, that includes timing, just keep that in mind. You want to connect this system first, then do the calibration software so it calibrates based off the signal delay introduced by the transmitter. For a lot of people, they won't really notice a 14 millisecond delay. That's extremely low, but I did want to mention that in case. I bring up the SoundPath wireless system because there is a trick called a sub crawl, which obviously with a 125-pound subwoofer, it's going to be a little bit more challenging here. But the idea in a perfect world, you would place the sub essentially where you sit. You would play bass on the sub, and then you would go to the various locations in that same room that you could permanently locate the sub to. The area that has the strongest bass performance is typically the most efficient place to put that subwoofer for your primary listening position. So you're almost like flip-flopping the orientation of your sub and you to find the ideal spot. Once you've placed it there, that's going to help make it sound better, but the idea is that you're not wasting some of that power handling due to inefficiencies or standing wave reflection issues in the room. It helps dial it in a lot. So if you can do it, it's really worth trying. Another thing to consider aside from room treatment, which is its whole separate video, there's a lot of good guides on there, but the option to consider dual subwoofers if you can help a lot. It's not perfect, but in a lot of cases, if you have a single sub, it might be loud at 80 hertz, but then you go to 50 hertz and you lose 10 or 15 decibels. A lot of that is created by something called the standing wave in the room. There's bass nulls and all these things are a byproduct of that. So if you picture like, two waves of water, like you drop 2 rocks in the water and you can see the ripples going towards each other, think of that as a sound wave. Depending on how those waves interact with each other, they can create nulls and dips or even boost frequencies to make different frequencies louder. So you lose the flat response that the speaker has. Now, dual subwoofers, if set up correctly, a lot of times can help address some of the issues by having a single source of bass. So if you have a big scoop in one area in a certain seating position and another area is really loud, having a separate subwoofer in a different location might help fill that void. Conversely, the way the subs interact with each other, they can actually cancel each other out as well. It's a very convoluted, unfortunate technical process to kind of dial in. Thankfully, SVS has a lot of tools on the app. It doesn't use a microphone, so you kind of have to know what you're doing. So just consider this as with great power comes great responsibility, but the app is pretty awesome. The most important feature and the first thing you'll see on the app is the ability to adjust your gain, which is of course one of the most important things to adjust to dial in for your system. They also give you profiles to select, and this is important for people like me because you might have one profile you have dialed in for movies, but then you switch into stereo mode for music, and you might want a different sound signature, so you can set them both independently with its own configurations to help perform better. You also have the ability to enable the low pass filter and even adjust it from 30 to 200 Hertz. So if you're connecting it to an amplifier, like I have a PS Audio Stellar Strata, that doesn't have a low pass filter, it sends out full range to the preamp out. Well, having this will allow me to choose where the frequency cutoff is on the bass profile to again give me more control over the matching to the full range speakers I'm connecting to. In addition to that, the big kicker with this is you have 6 slots for parametric EQ, which can be dangerous, but if you can measure and figure out where your bass notes are in the room, let's say you have a scoop at 80 Hertz, for example, or it's over amplified, well, you can use parametric EQ to adjust these minor dips and lifts to better suit the way the subwoofer is interacting with your room. You want as close to an ideal linear bass response as you can from below 20 Hertz if it's possible up to the cutoff point from where the subwoofer starts interacting with your speakers. Ideally, how the sub interacts with your speakers should be a relatively flat transition so you can't necessarily hear the difference of each product working together. Now, just the same way rooms can reduce bass and create like dips and frequency response, it can also boost bass too much in certain areas, which will cause bloat, boominess, and it just takes away from some of the clean presentation that a high quality sub like the SV17 has. So if you want to fix some of that, the SVS app has a room gain compensation option at 25, 31, and 40 Hertz with a slope of 6 or 12 decibels. It's basically reducing or rolling off some of that bass. So if you have too much of like a hallway, high pressure bass type feel, you can use one of those to help compensate some of that to again preserve the clean bass that you're expecting. And lastly, on the system settings side of the app, you can rename your sub, which is really helpful if you have multiple subs. That way you're not blindly adjusting them independently. You can change the power to standby mode versus always on, or do the 12-volt trigger if you want to utilize that on the back to have an external amp control it. I recommend leaving it on standby where it will power down after 20 minutes by itself. This helps not only save power, but it prolongs the life of the amp and it keeps the temps down. And it's a very silent, quick click on. I never really noticed it causing like negative issues. You know, a movie is going to have some kind of bass note within 20 minutes of playing, so the subs won't go to sleep in the middle of the movie and then wake up creating these odd pops. So I recommend just leaving it on auto. Now, even though the SVS app is really feature rich and robust, I didn't really use it too much aside from gain and my 2 profiles, partly because I'm using the Denon AVR receiver, which is the AVR X4700H. That has Odyssey Multi-EQ XT32. And by using that, it has a moving mic method. It measures timing, phase delay, frequency response. It's not perfect, but the idea is to calibrate these subwoofers and your speakers to work in more harmony with each other for your exact room. I actually paid $20 extra for the mobile app so I can get a lot more control over the calibrated result, which I highly recommend if you're spending this kind of money anyway. $20 really goes a long way. I set the subwoofers to minus 16 decibels for like close to a reference level bass amplitude when I was running the calibration software. I ran it, disabled things like mid-range compensation, which is more the speaker side of things, and removed some of the adjustments on higher frequencies. But as a result, I got much better bass response. It was so much cleaner and tighter, and it worked much better with my speakers. Now, I took things a step further for understanding the impact of having 2 subwoofers in my room, and I took a lot of measurements. One, if you're new to the channel, huge thank you for stopping by. If you are familiar with my channel, you know that I use measurements and objective data when I can. Not to dictate how the review will go, because ownership experience and real listing experiences are the most important thing at the end of the day. But objective measurements can help us learn and understand what we're hearing and also help you make a more informed decision. So this is a crude drawing of my living room layout. It's not the best, I'm not an artist, but I took multiple measurements using a calibrated C-weighted SPL meter. And what was really cool is when I measured this with both subs enabled versus just the left sub, just the right sub at both frequencies, it behaved differently. One thing that was consistent though is when I sat on the couch in different areas I tested, having 2 subs on had the most consistent bass performance at all frequency ranges combined, with exception of a couple areas which I measured some nulls when 2 were on because they would cancel each other out. Thankfully, due to room correction, that is fixed, but just simply enabling 2 subs occasionally without room correction would actually make the bass worse because of the whole standing wave reflection I mentioned earlier. This goes to show how important it is to understand placement in the room. If I only could use one subwoofer, the left one was much more efficient at filling the entire room's bass up, where the right would occasionally fill some of the nulls that I was experiencing throughout different sitting positions in the couch. Even when I went down the hallway, I had almost as much bass, if not more, than certain areas of the couch for like below 30 hertz because of that whole room gain thing I was talking about earlier. Now, I am going to make a dedicated review on understanding how some of these things impact the room to help kind of optimize your system more, but I wanted to show this because I really want you to get the most out of your investment and understand how important placement is and how your room interacts with the sub. It really can make a big difference. And whether you're listening to it by yourself or if you have family or guests over, sometimes it's not all about optimizing for a single listening position. And a lot of times I found that multiple subs ensure that everyone is getting the same bass enjoyment as that primary position, spreading the love out, if you will, of that glorious thunderous bass that something like the SB17 is going to deliver. If you think about this at a high level, subwoofers are a relatively simple solution to a common problem. A lot of people need more bass, especially in movies, because the majority of speakers out there that are full range don't dig deep enough to give you thunderous, powerful bass at 20 hertz. Naturally, the SB17 is at a caliber that is far beyond what most subwoofers can do, so I expect and received the performance I was hoping for. It's really, really loud. It's very clean. I never had clipping issues. In fact, I pushed it to uncomfortable levels and it never bottomed out. It's at the point where even on the larger living space, which I was really concerned with, I didn't know if I was going to be able to pressurize this room properly. And the 2 SB17s did it with no sweat whatsoever. So naturally, there are better subs out there. There are bigger, and when I say better, it's amplitude maybe. If you want closer to 10 hertz, there are some insane solutions out there that are also physically larger as well. The SB17 was perfect for me because it came in at a fairly reasonable price considering its performance. It's very compact. The app support is great, and I know SVS customer service is excellent as well. So overall, yes, this is a pinnacle subwoofer, but you're getting the performance that you'd expect for that price. So SVS has delivered a no compromise powerhouse of a sub with the SB17. And for those of you with the budget to support it, I can't find any real fault. It really is one of those jack of all trades subs, which surprised me because usually a sub this large with this kind of power handling, I don't associate that with speed and tactility for listening to, you know, the audiophile music. It delivered that perfectly fine, and thanks to the dual profiles, when I go into movie mode, it gives me all that deep thunderous bass I want as well. So I've been extremely happy with it, and I hope you found this review helpful if you've been shopping some subwoofers for yourself. With that being said, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you at the next video. Stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye.